Brian Dunning, what do you think makes conspiracy theories so contagious?
I would say there's two main reasons that people believe conspiracy theories that make them uh, seductive, that you want to believe them. I would say the first is that they give people the feeling that they have sort of this secret insider knowledge that puts them on a higher level from everyone else. I understand the secret forbidden knowledge and you don't. I would say the second reason is that it takes complicated topics that most people can't understand or can't fully understand and boils them down into something really simple, some really simple explanation that's very easy to understand. And this gives people the impression that they do understand all of these complicated topics around the world. An example of that would be the medicines coming from big pharma. There's a popular conspiracy theory that says that the reason we can't cure all diseases is because there's no money in that. There's only money in keeping people sick. And so that's why they don't release the real cure. So these are two basic reasons that I think explain why most people gravitate toward conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Just so we're coming to terms, what is your definition roughly of a conspiracy theory?
So when we're talking about conspiracy theories, we're talking about basically false conspiracy theories. We're not talking about, Richard Nixon and Watergate. I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a conspiracy that was discovered. It's basically a future prediction. It's you're saying that without any evidence that it will be discovered in the future that this has been going on the whole time. So it's kind of a future prediction of something that there's no evidence of right now that it's going to be discovered. It has to be known to the conspiracy theorist or believed by the conspiracy theorist before it's discovered by law enforcement, journalists, investigators, what have you. If it's not, then you're just reading the news. You're not having a conspiracy theory of something.
Yeah. I appreciate in your book how you laid out a couple of contingencies to watch out for. Um, it had to be specific enough to be falsifiable, and it
Yeah.
had to be known by the conspiracy theorist before, as you said, being revealed by law enforcement or something like that. So an exception to that was Navy dolphins. I used to be a Navy officer, and I knew dolphin trainers.
Oh,
So I found that one really interesting. What's going on with that one that makes it not exactly a conspiracy theory, even though there's truth behind it?
I mean, when was there a case when people were saying that, hey, this is going on, and it's being denied, or there was no
Mhm.
public information about it? I mean, when did the movie The Day of the Dolphin come out with George C. Scott? I mean, 1970 something.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess it was that. What year was that? Gosh, I don't have it in front of me. There was that. I guess a Penthouse magazine article that
Yes.
really kind of was the first to reveal all of the details. And that was the first that anyone really knew about this outside of people in the Navy. And um, to my knowledge, a lot of what they were doing, things like retrieving test torpedoes and things like that. I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't particularly nefarious or evil. None of that was especially secret that I
Mhm.
that I know of. So again, I just don't know of a case where people were saying that this is happening and it was being denied or wasn't already known.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems there's a difference too between something that's just a plain old military or government secret. I mean, there were elements to Navy Dolphins and how they were
Sure.
being trained and what they were trained to do and things like that were kept secret. But that wasn't a conspiracy theory. That's just a plain old government military secret, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that the government keeps the specifications of the F-22
Yeah.
secret.
Yeah.
What's its top speed? I don't know, whatever things are like that. I know that that's being kept secret, and there's good reasons for that.
Mhm.
That's I wouldn't call myself a conspiracy theorist for saying that yes, that information exists and is out there, and it's being withheld from us.
Yeah. So, Brian, we know that there are these things that aren't quite conspiracy theories. How do we spot the ones that are?
Um, well, let's take an example. 9/11 was an inside job.
Mm.
So there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. I mean, the entire chapter and verse, every single detail of what happened is public information. The conspiracy theory is basically denying everything that's known and claiming that there's this whole alternative narrative which is completely unevidenced. That's a great example of a conspiracy theory.
Mhm.
It's clearly false. It's specific enough to be falsifiable. It has been falsified, and yet there's still. Um, I got an email about a week ago from whatever agent represents this guy Richard Gage, who's the guy running the architects and engineers behind 9/11, saying, "Hey, he'd be a great guest on your podcast." Like, you don't know, you don't understand much about my podcast, do you? So yeah, that's the conspiracy theorists are still out there on that one.
Yeah. And Brian, one phrase that you get at too that's popular with these types is the official story. What's
The
the
official
distinction
story.
between calling something the official story? 9/11, there's an official story, and then there's other stories.
Yeah, the official story has, as far as the internet goes anyway, has almost come to be like a swear word. That's like the worst way that you can denigrate something. Say, oh, that's the official story. The vaccines reduce your chance of getting COVID. Oh, sure, that's the official story. When you don't have when you don't have anything else to um, when you can't prove your conspiracy theory, you can at least point out that it goes against the official story. And that by itself seems to carry enough credibility for some people that if the government says something, it's therefore automatically false. And so any alternative narrative must be true.
Yeah. So, Brian, you have researched these thoroughly, so many of them outlined in your book, Conspiracies Declassified. How do you go about doing your own research? Because research is a phrase that is also popular in these communities and things.
Oh my gosh, yes, do your own research.
Yeah.
There's a great little meme floating around. It's been out there for years. Uh, Vaccine research, and here's a scientist in a lab doing something with a microscope. Anti-vaccine research. There's a woman sitting on the toilet looking at her phone, looking at YouTube videos. And the scary thing is, a lot of when you're a journalist, you a lot of your research is conducted going through stuff on your phone. You're not in a lab doing work yourself. So I'm not out there. I have friends who work at university labs conducting the actual research on conspiracy theories, putting out these gigantic surveys, surveying tens of thousands of people all around the world. What do you believe? What else do you believe? What are your demographics? Trying to find out what are all the connections between these particular belief systems. Well, they publish their work, and so I go to the published work. So I'm often just reading documents. A lot of what I do consists of reading academic articles. And that brings up the question, well, how do you know what's a good article and what's a bad article? And the best answer I can give to that is years and years of experience. I mean, I've been doing this for 19 years now. And I can tell you right away what's a good journal, what's a crap journal, what's a good article, what's a crap article, what's wrong with this research, why is this one poorly performed. But a lot of that is incredibly complicated and takes a lot of experience to understand. So that's a difficult point to explain
Mhm.
because, especially if I'm trying to explain that to a conspiracy theorist, because they want the simple explanation. They say, well, you're being paid to promote the official story. That's as simple as it can possibly get. And so that's another illustration of how a conspiracy theory is seductive and attractive.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to simply believe that I'm being paid by the man than to understand all of the immense amount of work and experience that goes into this.
Ironic too. I imagine you could do quite well financially promoting conspiracy theories.
If there's someone writing those checks, I haven't come across who that is yet, but
But I mean, the fans and the rabid nature around that information, you could be viral, you could be a hit sensation.
yeah, I wish I had that. I wish I had that formula.
Yeah. 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 Someone
There's
like
not a lot of profit in science writing.
yeah. Yeah. So what's an example of that process for you? You've gone through so many of these over the years. What's one maybe that stands out where you had a research process that was interesting?
Um, what a great question. We talked about, I would say one of the ones that was most fruitful was the moon landing
Mm,
conspiracy, that we never went to the moon. And that's one that I actually broke that down into 3 episodes, which is very rare. Multi-part Skeptoid podcast episodes are very rare, but I wanted to really be comprehensive on this. And so I broke it down into 3 parts. One is the history of the conspiracy theory. How long has this belief actually been around? How did it first arise? What were its roots? And surprisingly, it came from Christian fundamentalism. And the second part was, what are the specific answers to the specific claims? Like, oh, you can see the flag flapping in the wind on the moon. Well, here's why it does that, is because it was held out by wires. Okay, there's a million of these specific answers that you give. And the third, which I thought was the most interesting, and what I really enjoyed the most in that episode, was the physical proofs that humans from Earth went to the moon and came back and brought these moon rocks and stuff. And that was fascinating because I really wanted to come up with stuff that there's no alternate explanation for, and there isn't. But again, it's complicated stuff. Things like uh, the um, the radiation damage in the crystalline structure in moon rocks. So if you look at the moon rocks and you look inside the crystal structure of them, you can see damage that happened from cosmic rays. And that couldn't have happened if those rocks had been on Earth. Those rocks had to be on the moon or outside the Earth's atmosphere anyway, in order for those particles to reach them. And we know that, pardon me, we can tell that those rocks came back to Earth in a spaceship or in some kind of similarly protected environment, because they don't have the transformations that would have happened to them if they had come through the atmosphere as meteors. So there's a lot of stuff like that. There's
mhm.
the reflector that's also that we placed on the moon that reflects light in any direction. It's kind of like an egg carton. It's just got a bunch of round surfaces on it. So you shine a laser at it from Earth, and the laser comes right back. There's no other structures on the moon that could be there if we hadn't put it there. And you take all of these together, and it just tells this incredibly detailed story, all of which there's no alternate explanation for, that I just find fascinating.
Yes. Brian, I'm so glad you're talking about this one. In reading your book, that part really stood out to me. I wasn't aware of some of these physical proofs, and I think you put it something like the evidence from the scientific part of this is so strong that even all the nations that wouldn't want to believe that we went to the moon had to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a point of logic. It's not a piece of evidence that, yeah, the Soviet Union would have loved nothing better than to prove that we were lying.
Right.
But no, they borrowed the moon rocks. They've got moon rocks of their own, and their scientists found the same things that we did. And it there's a there's a there's a great sort of camaraderie between scientists in most cases all around the world. They don't care what nationality anyone is. They're all working on the same problems and learning the same things. And even through much of the Cold War, American scientists and some Soviet scientists had the same thing going on. Um, we've had a lot of that with China
Hmm.
through the last 40 years or so. Um, Not lately, but that's something that I just love about the scientific community.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. Brian, just any thoughts on why we haven't been to the moon in a while?
There's no reason to.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's really clear. There's something called the Planetary Science Decadal Survey, I think is the correct name of it. Every 10 years, um, planetary scientists get together and they decide, what are the most important missions right now? What do we most need to get science from? And that usually comes out to be things like, we want to go get out to the gas giants, and we want to go to the ice worlds like Enceladus and Europa, and we want to track down these potential signs of life that we've found. So looking for life in the solar system is always high on that list. Looking for exoplanets and doing space telescopes, that's always high on the list. There's absolutely nothing that says we should go to the moon. There's just no science to be done there. And that's why we haven't been to the moon until this whole Artemis program, which has no scientific justification. It's purely another propaganda thing, like the Cold War. So we want to show that the U.S. is number one. Scientists are going, we don't need that mission, and that's why it ended up being such an oddball kludge of a mission. There's political reasons besides just showing that we're number one. It was keeping legacy shuttle contractors on life support. So they came up with this SLS rocket that uses used flown shuttle parts. We're talking things that were in space 35 years ago. No space engineer is going to say that's a great idea. That's the best way forward. Nevertheless, that's why the SLS exists, and that's why the Artemis program exists, was to justify the SLS. It's just a bunch of dumb politics that are the only reason to be going back to the moon now. No scientific reason for it.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about the human element of conspiracy theories. On a basic level, what sort of need for people do you think it satisfies?
The need for relevance. And that sounds kind of petty and insulting, but a lot of people, they haven't gotten famous. They haven't accomplished a lot in life. And here's a way that they can feel relevant by showing that they have this special insider knowledge. I have not ever really engaged with a conspiracy. I don't engage with conspiracy theorists much at all. I used to, but there's just no upside in it, so I don't anymore. But when I do, you just continually see this same pattern. Here's someone who is angry at the world. I've never seen a conspiracy theorist who has their belief without also being angry at the rest of the world, being angry at the people who don't accept this belief, who their belief casts as the villain. It's something that exists with anger, alongside anger toward some group of people. So, yeah, it's they're never positive things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems that it touches on a need to sort of round things out to believe that everything happens for a reason. And one of the best ways to do that is just to paint an overarching power, this idea of the Illuminati. You have a great chapter on different theories of what exactly this power is. Who were the Knights Templar?
That was a great episode to research because, pardon me, I'm very froggy this morning.
That's all right. Take your time.
When I first set out to do that episode, I'd heard of the Knights Templar a million times, but I really knew nothing at all about them. I knew it had something to do with the Crusades, and that was it. And when I was a kid, we had this family friend who had told my mom that he was a Knight Templar and that he had some special status in the Catholic Church, and she always fully believed it. I didn't know anything about it, so I just, okay, fine. I guess that's what a Knight Templar is. So I set about to do this episode. God, this was a long time ago now, maybe 10, 15 years ago when I first wrote on this topic. They were after the First Crusade, which was the only really successful crusade in which the Christians gained territory. They then had the problem of keeping this territory. How do you do that? Because they're really spread thin over a very large area around the Mediterranean. So the Pope authorized the creation of all of these orders. So the Knights Templar was one of these. The Knights Hospitaller, there was a whole bunch of them. And they were empowered to accept donations and to be knights and all of this stuff. And so you had a lot of money flowing to these orders from, Christian Europe, basically. And their job was simply to defend these lands and to govern these lands. And they didn't last very long because, as we know, the subsequent crusades are where they lost everything that they gained in that first crusade. And by the end of that, they were just done. They were literally just gone. Um, as each kind of fell, the Pope ordered their assets transferred into other orders, and that's what happened to the Templars. Most of their stuff went to the hospital. I've never known how to pronounce it. The knights, the Hospitallers. There was the Teutonic Knights. I think got most of the rest of their stuff. And as far as the knights themselves, they simply joined these other orders or they retired.
Mhm.
So there was never any treasure or secret remnants of them still hanging out. The whole history of how they were dissolved is well known. And there's simply no alternate version of that story except what the conspiracy theorists make up.
Mhm. And the secret power behind the Knights Templar is sort of a marketing tactic to get donations, something like that?
They all had that. This is where we these stories of things like the Ark of the Covenant and everything, where these stories really became big because each of these orders, they had to market themselves in order to draw donations from Europe. They were competing with all the other orders. And so they would often say that, oh, we've got this special thing. Our power comes directly from Solomon or whatever it is. They would just kind of make up some some unique legacy that tied them to special church icons of some sort.
Mhm.
So that was kind of a common feature, and it's kind of funny with reading about this stuff how similar it is to marketing that companies do today.
Yeah.
Um, more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, Brian, today I hear similar things about the Freemasons and that maybe they have special secrets. Any thoughts on that one?
The funny thing about the Freemasons is that I've never done an episode
Hmm.
um, directly addressing all the claims about them. My uncle was a Freemason, and um, he would explain the whole thing to me from the time that I was a little kid. So I kind of always knew that there's really not a bunch here. It's just a bunch of random guys in town who, each year they'll put together a scholarship for a local high school kid, or they'll. Um, the Freemasons have one kind of unique thing, and that's that traditionally they've been invited to lay the cornerstone of new buildings being constructed in many cities throughout the U.S. That still happens today, and that goes all the way back to the days of the founding fathers. So they do that, and they do these little minor civic charitable works. It's basically all there is to it, and they meet for lunch once a week or once a month. Um, so when I first started hearing all of the conspiracy theories about them, I'm going, wait a minute. You're telling me that my uncle is secretly running the Illuminati or secretly running the world behind the scenes, and uh, how do you research something that simply doesn't exist?
Hmm.
All right, I mean, you can go to a real Masonic lodge, you can talk to real Freemasons, and you can find out what they really do. How do you research something that they don't do and have never done? It's you quickly run into this whole thing of absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? So, like, I can't prove that the Freemasons don't secretly control the world, but there's certainly no proof that they do. And sometimes you just have to leave it there.
Brian, let's talk about another one. Let's talk about government oppression. What do you think makes people want to believe that the government is holding them back?
Hmm. It's it's always an attractive belief if you can place the blame for your own lot in life onto someone else. I'm not as rich as I wish I was. I'm not as educated. I don't have as nice of a house or a car as I wish I did. I have bad health care. Whatever it is, it's really easy to say it's someone else's fault. It's Right now we're saying it's the fault of the immigrants, that everything we don't like is the immigrants' fault. That's the popular, um, that's sort of today's version of the role that Jews have played throughout much of history. Jews have almost always been the lightning rod drawing these criticisms. The Jews took all the money, and so there's none left for me. Or and sometimes it's going to be the government, and it depends what party's in power and what party you're a part of. And sometimes that argument makes sense, and sometimes you have to point that blame someplace else, as they're doing now with immigrants. It's just I think as long as there's been humans, humans have been blaming their own problems on someone else. I really
Mm.
think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. Brian, one thing that involves the government is vaccines. You wrote in 2018, vaccine conspiracy theories are everywhere. What do you think about that now?
The really sad thing is that has become a more mainstream belief than I ever would have dreamed in 2018. Uh, you have fully half the nation. I come from a really conservative family, and not long ago I was at a family sort of not a reunion, but just an event where everyone was there at dinner, and here's a medical doctor talking about how we shouldn't be taking vaccines. She wouldn't have been saying that 5, 10 years ago. Um, I was just kind of astonished that it had even gone that far. Um, this is one that just absolutely baffles me. Um, it's similar to climate change denial in that the evidence is everywhere, the proof is everywhere, and simply due to tribalistic influences and really no other reason, people are ignoring the facts and ignoring the evidence and just fully embracing this alternative version of events that cannot be supported by facts and is directly contradicted by the facts. It really shows the power of tribal influence on society, particularly today when these influences are stronger than they typically are.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian, let's go a little deeper on this one. Um, Something you came to in your book is addressing questions like, what does big pharma have to gain from vaccines? Is it super profitable or something? And a couple quotes from your book too, just to give some background for people. Page 42, vaccines are the single most important and successful public health initiative. Another one, according to UNICEF, vaccines have saved about 9 million lives per year. So what's this idea about big pharma getting rich on them?
Um, Certainly, big pharma does get rich on some vaccines,
Hmm.
on others, not at all.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, let's go back 10 years and go back to normal times.
Yeah.
Um, you look at an AIDS drug, for example, and let's say you're someone who has to take one of these, and some sort of an HIV suppressor, and it costs you an exorbitant amount of money here in the United States to take this drug. However, the money you just paid is also paying for 100 doses given away for free in Africa. So the economics behind this are super complicated, and they're not at all equitably distributed. The whole economic situation behind vaccines, because they have such incredibly heavy lifting to do, they have to be given out all around the world, are extremely complicated and very tenuous. And I would never be able to sit down and write a paper explaining how that whole economic system works because it is so fiercely complicated. Vaccines are definitely problematic when you're trying to explain how and why they're produced, and um, who pays for them and when and where. They're only simple to explain when you show the results.
Mm.
The results are so clear. Here's the rate of disease. The vaccine is introduced. Look at the rate of disease now. It just plummets. That's very easy to show. Um, and that's the part that really just it baffles and saddens me that people will not accept um, hard facts like that they did accept 10 years ago.
Mhm. Yeah.
They changed their mind just because that's the direction that the wind is blowing within their tribe.
Yeah. Brown, there's the idea of the rising rates of autism correlated with vaccines. You also pointed out correlated with the popularity of organic food. Uh,
Yeah.
what can we make about that one?
Yeah, most people have heard by now the when autism rates were rising really sharply, it was because we were now um, reclassifying all of these things as being on the autism spectrum. Things that previously had been separate, like Asperger's syndrome, is one example. Uh, it was reclassified and said this is actually part of the autism spectrum of disorders. So that was one aspect to it. The other aspect to it was that there was more awareness that autism was a thing. I mean, I remember having friends in grammar school that I can now look back and say that kid was on the autism spectrum. Nobody had heard of the word before, and so nobody ever took them and had them diagnosed. Awareness has skyrocketed, and so parents continue to take their kids in. Um, Parents self-diagnose their kids with autism. A lot of these autism diagnoses supposedly have never been actually diagnosed. They're just self-diagnosed by the parents. So that's why we see rates rising. It's diagnoses rising. It's not actual incidences has never risen at all. We've been able to show that that's been consistent as far back as we have good data for it, which isn't very far, like maybe the 1950s. But we can see that the rates have not risen at all, have not changed in the slightest. It's We've been able to prove that it's not related to any kind of environmental factors, at least postnatal environmental factors, proving RFK wrong, and yet, one other way. Um, that's another case where it's learning the facts is actually interesting and cool,
Yeah.
and simply stopping at that, refusing to look at the facts, refusing to accept the facts, and just accepting whatever's in pop culture is so unsatisfying intellectually. I don't understand the appeal.
Hmm. Brian, do you have a favorite conspiracy theory? One that tickles you?
um, my favorite conspiracy theory has got to be the QAnon thing,
Okay.
because it was so absurd on its face. Um, I understand it's starting to make a comeback. There's Q plus now, I guess, which I really haven't spent any time on. But the original iteration of the Q conspiracy theory was so comically silly. It was that this government insider who had an implausible level of security clearance that you wouldn't have for what he was doing, had been appointed by the government to reveal the secret arrests that they were going to be making. And he was instructed to reveal this not to the press or in any kind of conventional place, but on a really bizarre internet forum known for child pornography and assorted illegal content. And this was the government's preferred way of, of spreading this information. And then every single one of his predictions failed to come true. And yet people still believed it. It's everything about it I just found hilarious. Hilarious isn't the right word. I mean, you can laugh at it, but it's actually very, very sad.
Yeah.
Why would people believe something as implausible as this, and that's such a proven failure? So I just kind of love that one, not for its extreme implausibility, but also for the impact that it has had. I mean, we people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, she was elected to Congress strictly on the strength of being a QAnon believer. That's that's astounding and wonderful to me.
Yeah. It is amazing the degree to which we can get caught up in these delusions. I think one of my favorites is that Australia isn't real. Have you heard this one?
Oh, sure, yeah, that was
Yeah.
a good one.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
Like most conspiracy theories, it was interesting to find its genesis. Um, if you just do a little bit of reading about it, people will say things like, well, no one's ever actually been there. You've never actually met anyone from Australia. And well, I've met plenty of people from Australia, and I have been there. But a lot of people haven't. And so they'll say, boy, you're right. I've never been there. It must not exist. But when you go back to its genesis, it's actually kind of interesting. Uh, the story goes that Australia was founded as a prison colony for the UK. They would send ships of prisoners over there to become colonists, and well, they just stopped the ships halfway and dumped the people out in the ocean. This is the greatest mass murder in all of history, and so they're trying to cover it up by saying, no, 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 we took them to Australia. It's kind of like when your dog dies when you're a kid and your parents say, no, we sent him to a farm where he can run and run and be happy. The government said, no, 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 we sent them to Australia where they can run and be happy. We didn't just dump them at sea. So, I mean, from a certain perspective, it's like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, it's at least a cohesive story. So it was cool to learn the genesis of that one.
Yeah.
It's not as good as Finland doesn't exist, though.
What's that one?
The idea that Finland doesn't exist, and that people who are from Finland or who believe that they live in Finland, they're actually, I forget, are they live actually in Sweden or Norway? I think they're actually in Sweden. I could be wrong about the details of this. And the maps have simply been redrawn, and they think they live here, but they actually live here. And where Finland is believed to be is actually just more ocean. And the reason we're hiding the existence of this part of the ocean is because after World War II, Japan, I'm going to get these details wrong too, but the Trans-Siberia Highway or the Trans-Siberia Railroad was built so that Japanese fishermen could travel to the ocean that Finland is said to exist on top of, fish illegally, and bring the fish back to Japan. And it had something to do with their Japanese fisheries were all wiped out after World War II or something like that. It's kind of this whole complicated story to explain the fishing industry in Japan. And it's wonderful to see how
Yeah.
people can construct these whole big things, and then other people can go, yeah, that makes sense. And then they can add to the story too. And soon you've got this whole big narrative woven together. It's
Yeah.
fascinating stuff.
The degree of construction is stunning. I've been to Australia and I stayed in a hotel where many aircrew from different airlines were coming through from different countries. So all these people would have to be in on this conspiracy that they're not actually flying to Australia, and that all these people are just actors, and this whole country that has a culture and an Olympic team, governments, everything military, that it would all have to be fabricated is just baffling to me. And I don't understand what the motivation is behind one like that. I can understand the government oppression thing and wanting to feel like it's not my fault if something's wrong. What what drives things like denying an entire continent?
It's hard to say, and it's almost certainly multifactorial. It's probably not
Yeah.
just one thing. And for everyone who believes it, they may believe it for a little bit of a different reason. The the whole thing where just government is always up to something evil.
Yeah.
We know that that's true to some degree. Right now there's probably covert teams assassinating someone somewhere. I have no idea. But we know that governments have secrets. We all accept that. It's kind of a necessary way for the way the world works. Um, and so as long as you have in the back of your head that governments are always up to something evil, um, and if you've just vaguely heard that, oh, they invented the concept of Australia to cover up the fact that they were dumping criminals at sea for decades and decades. Um, there are people who can hear these things and believe them without really ever putting much thought into it. Something like 50% of the population thinks aliens actively visit the Earth. And that's because all of this nonsense with the ufologists have been persuading Congress to keep having these hearings, getting the other UFO people in Congress to agree to let them sort of trumpet their beliefs in these sort of made up little whistleblower hearings. So it's lent the whole thing an air of credibility. Now, the average person who believes this has simply heard it on the news. They heard it in the background, something, oh, they're having another UFO hearing in Congress to explain these alien videos. People go about their daily lives because these are not subjects they're particularly interested in or particularly care about. Now, that seems odd for me because this is what I do for a living. I'm very interested and I very much care about these things. But for most people, they don't care. But if you ask them, do aliens visit the Earth? They'll probably say, yeah, I think I heard something about that on the news. Yeah, yeah. And that's all. It's not something you have to actively believe to simply accept. So I think that to whatever degree there are people who accept that Australia doesn't exist, it's probably more along those lines, I would think, that, oh, yeah, I heard something about that. And it's just something that they don't care about. They care about Taylor Swift's next album and what they're doing at the coffee shop with their friends tomorrow. Not everyone is interested in the same things that the rest of us are interested in. And so they can accept strange beliefs about them without really ever needing to examine those beliefs or put them to the test. So I think that also drives a lot of what we would term belief in a conspiracy theory. It's, a very much soft background belief. It's not a hard belief that these people are out there really promoting.
Mm-hmm. So Brian, as you said, you made a living debunking these things. What's the sort of sword through the Gordian knot to debunk something like Australia or Finland not existing?
That's a wonderful term, and I've never heard that before.
Oh,
So, sword through the accordion?
through the Gordian knot. Alexander the Great.
I heard sword through the accordion, and I'm trying to go, what does this analogy mean?
We can do that if you want.
Okay, the sword through the accordion. I don't know. What was the question again?
What's the way to really debunk something like that an entire country or continent doesn't exist?
Well, first of all, I mean, you can't ever set out to debunk.
Okay.
Because that's starting with your conclusion. And that is a very popular straw man about what people in my profession do.
Yeah.
That science writers, they all start with the conclusion that they're being paid to promote or whatever it is, or that the orthodoxy, the scientism religion demands that they toe the line and promote this orthodox view. That's the common straw man. In fact, when I start out to research and investigate some urban legend, some story, I rarely have heard about it before, or if I've heard about it, I've never looked into the details of it before. I mean, a lot of people know Bigfoot, but how many people have really thoroughly dived into the history of belief in Bigfoot? So it's like that. I'll have heard the idea that Finland doesn't exist, but I've never looked into anything about it before. And the interesting thing is you always do find a kernel of truth or true history in there. For example, with as silly as the Australia that doesn't exist thing is, it is true that the UK was shipping prisoners out overseas. Okay, that's about the only part that's true, but at least you've got that to start with as an actual historical kernel, something that actually can be researched, and you can find out more about the whole historical context of how and why and when that happened, and you can learn a whole story behind that, and you can put together the whole historical narrative of what actually happened. And by the time you've done that, well, there really isn't any room for there to be no Australia and for the prisoners to have been dumped at sea. That's, I would say, a better description of what I do. It's not starting from a conclusion and working backwards. It's starting with what's real and fleshing that out and understanding the true history and the true science behind the story first.
Yeah. With that in mind, let's look at a big one. Let's talk about flat Earth. What even got this one going?
Oh my gosh. Here in town, I'm in Bend, Oregon.
Nice.
Here in town yesterday, there was a flat Earth meetup at a brew pub. and a friend and I were going to go to it, and we both ended up having last minute conflicts and couldn't make it. I am so bummed because I would have loved to go to that. I went to a Bigfoot meetup here in town a few years ago, and it was fascinating. I encourage everyone to go to meetups of these groups to really understand where they're coming from. Don't worry, it's not going to rub off on you and convert you.
Well, what's that like
So,
for you, Brian? I mean, you must be, a major outlier in a group like that.
well, yeah, I mean, typically I would just sit in the back and listen,
Mhm.
keep the mouth closed and the ears open. When I went to the Bigfoot thing, though, the thing that they wanted to do for their meeting was to go around the room and have everyone talk about their connection to Bigfoot. And so when that happens, I'm always completely honest. I said, I'm not a Bigfoot believer. I do this for a living. And I was just really curious to hear what all you people had to say and what all your experiences are. And people love that.
Huh.
It's not confrontational. Don't go in there being a dick. Go in there wanting to learn. I wanted to learn.
Yeah.
I would have loved to do the same thing at the flat earth thing and just hear these people talk about why and how they believe this, how they got there. Um, we were just going to talk about the flat earth conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
Um, this is another one that came just like the moon hoax. It came from fundamental Christianity. And it's a fairly recent belief. It only arose in the 1800s. Prior to that, there's really no history showing that any group of people believed the earth was flat. That was certainly not the case with Columbus. When you're in grammar school and you learn the story of Columbus, the story is usually presented as, hey, everyone else in court said the earth is flat. You can't reach the east by going west. Well, no, that's absolutely false. They very much knew that the earth was round. They were just simply looking for better trade routes. It was as simple as that. So this whole narrative that the flat earth has been sort of the default belief of people throughout the ages is simply straight up false. The ancient Greeks had very good measurements of the circumference of the earth just by doing simple science experiments. So it wasn't until very recently that, and it usually arises in the US and or United Kingdom, these fundamentalist Christians were trying to prove the literal truth of a handful of oddball Bible passages that talked about, oh gosh, it's been so long since I've read them. Talked about the firmament so far. Well, you have to interpret that as meaning that the earth is flat, things like that. And um, that persisted through the basically until the space program. And then it fell apart in the United States. The original Flat Earth Society kind of was the final um, manifestation of these religious groups. The Flat Earth Society was an older couple who were the People's Covenant Church, and they died and their house burned down way out in the Mojave Desert about the same time, and that was kind of the end of them. And then you've got the modern flat earth belief, which arises out of conspiracy theory culture. Um, and the interesting thing about the modern flat earth belief is it also has a case zero. We can pinpoint exactly where and when it began. And it began with one guy who wrote an ebook. Um, I want to say his name was Eric Dubai. I'd have to go back to my notes to double check that. He wrote an ebook. It never went anywhere. And so he made a YouTube video about it, and that exploded and went crazy. And you can look at Google Trends and you can see that nobody was thinking about the flat earth at all until this guy's YouTube video went nuts. And then all sorts of other people started making copycat YouTube videos. And so we can go back and point exactly to where it began, just as the earlier manifestation of Christian fundamentalism belief in the flat earth, we can also go back and we can see exactly when and where that began. Um, Doing that kind of historical research, I just find fascinating and I just love doing it.
Yeah, it's clear that you dig the research. And one thing that we talked about with the moon is the proofs about the moon. I wonder, what are the best proofs about flat Earth?
So that is a great question. And I want to be able to answer that. And I have not done a show on that. and I'm not going to step on the toes of the people who have done that. So I'm the first to admit, when I haven't done the work on a show yet, I'm not going to talk about it. But they exist, I'm sure, and I am as eager and excited as you to find out what those best proofs are. I'm
Cool.
going to leave it at that.
All right. Respect that. Respect that. Yeah. So some things seem as though they're kind of conspiracy theories that were proven true. Talk of things like Project MK Ultra. I've done an interview with Stephen Kinzer, who is a biographer, wrote an excellent book about MK Ultra, and Sidney Gottlieb, who was a major character in that whole story. What's going on there? Is that a true conspiracy theory? Is that something else?
So MK Ultra is true. The thing about it is it was revealed by basically a whistleblower. And to my knowledge, I've never been able to find that it ever existed as a conspiracy theory. It was first revealed through journalism, and suddenly everyone knew about it. But I can't find any record of anyone saying that they suspected this was going on. The government's experimenting on us with LSD. I never found evidence of that. I was on Joe Rogan in 2014, asking this question: what are the conspiracy theories that you think have been proven true? Because I've never really come upon one. And so I challenged Rogan's audience, which is a big audience, to send me, Brian@Skeptoid.com, email me the conspiracy theories that you believe were proven true. And I mean, there was basically 5 that almost everyone sent me. And all 5 of them, they never existed as conspiracy theories. They were revealed to the world by law enforcement or they were always openly known from the very beginning. The Gulf of Tonkin is an example of one that was always openly known from the very beginning. And that was the triggering event of the Vietnam War, was this a little naval battle among these small gunships off the coast. And we used that as the pretext for, okay, we're now in a shooting war with Vietnam. Let's go. As it was actually happening, as the American ship was firing upon this little Vietnamese gunboat, the captain was on the radio talking to Washington, D.C., saying, I don't think there's anything out there. We don't have anything on the radar. We're just shooting out into the dark, and no one's shooting back at us. We don't think there's another ship out there. And a congressman was relaying this to the press in real time. He was saying, there is no other ship out there. This is not actually a shooting war. And you can't say that, hey, we believe it was just, there was no actual ship out there. We believe the Americans were just shooting into this. That was openly known from as it was literally happening live. So you can't give credit to conspiracy theorists for having discovered that one. Yeah. It was being told to them in real time as it was happening. Yeah. So they're all just cases like this. If it's not a conspiracy theory, if it gets proven true eventually, but it was never a conspiracy theory, you can't credit the conspiracy theorists for it.
Mm-hmm. Brian, what do you think got you interested in all this in the first place?
I can tell you exactly. It was mostly things that I read about when I was a little kid and that I always wondered about. And these were things like UFO cases and haunted house cases and Bigfoots and Loch Ness Monster and all these cryptozoology cases. I read all of these books when I was a kid, and I believed every word of it. And I was always amazed that other people weren't terrified to go out into the forest when there's all these big, giant, hairy monsters running around. And a lot of these things that I read, these particular cases, just always stuck with me. And as I, grew up and went into business and everything, I just continued to wonder what actually went on with this, and just started researching a few of these things on my own. And when podcasts appeared, I said, my gosh, this is fantastic. This is a chance for me to reveal what I've learned about these things that kept me mystified for decades. And I've just been doing it ever since. It became a full-time job fairly quickly. and that was 2006. So I've been a full-time science writer since then.
Yeah. And you found a really great way in from what I can tell, which was that you were able to draw these stories and use things like recordings of people claiming, "Oh, I see this alien or something," and then overlay that with like a beep that would measure, the movement of some sort of lighthouse or something that was really the source of the signal, things like that. What do you love about it now that's kept you with that, or do you have any thoughts on that origin?
Um, Cases like what you're talking about, where podcasts are interesting because it's an audio only medium, at least historically. It's going to video, and soon I'm going to be videoing myself recording the podcasts, just because you kind of have to do that. But opportunities to really illustrate a factual revelation through audio only are rare and difficult. It's easy to interview someone and to get someone who was there telling their story, but that really doesn't illustrate, it doesn't show what happened. Um, I love those opportunities. They've been few and far between, simply because that's rare, where you've got um, different cases where you can overlay audio with one another and find out what's going on. Another case of that was, I hate to be talking about Bigfoot so much, but Bigfoot vocalizations. You can take the album that you can buy of, here's all these recordings people have made of Bigfoot, and then you can play recordings of the actual animal making that same noise. And that's another case where you can really illustrate with audio, um, something that takes full advantage of the medium. So I love those opportunities. I wish there was more of them.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think makes the world today seem like such a vulnerable place for these conspiracy theories and things?
Um, I don't know that it is. People will often ask me things like, hey, has the rise of the internet made it easier for the conspiracy theorists and the pseudoscience people to promote their views? And I can say, well, yes, of course it has, but it's also made it easier for the pro-science people to promote their views. Sort of a rising tide lifts all boats equally. I don't think that these major shifts in media and how media works have really benefited one side or the other. Um, I don't think that the world today is more prone to misinformation than it ever has been before. And this is another thing where you can go back to, newspapers from hundreds of years ago. You can go back to books from the medieval days, and you can find that the same things were happening then as are happening now. And reporters were using the same sort of sensationalist techniques as the worst of the tabloids are today. Um, the more I look into history, the more I find that we are not unique or special or particularly bad or particularly good. I think humans are humans, and we're illustrating that just as people always have.
Yeah. So, if misinformation is a theme through history, what have you seen maybe that might be helpful in stopping it?
This is a fascinating question, and it's been studied. It's been studied a lot more in recent years, kind of since ever since Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts. I think that was a moment that really shifted um, some focus in academia to how and why people are believing misinformation. That went from one of many topics being studied in academia to one of the major topics being really studied in academia. So it's a great moment. Thank you, Kellyanne, for saying that. One of the most influential papers on this, gosh, how many years ago was this now? Probably 3-4 years ago. Uh, Came up with this this concept of pre-bunking, where when you take people who believe something that's false, like say vaccines don't work, vaccines do more harm than good, whatever it is you want to believe about vaccines, you take some false belief And now they've been attempting all of these different methods to give people the correct information. And how can you change minds? What of these techniques actually works? And that's everything from humor and mocking them to explaining the facts to showing them a movie, having them read something. What are they reading? I mean, all these different methods to give information to people. And the only one that seems to move the needle is pre-bunking, where you expose them to the facts before they get exposed to the misinformation. Now, unfortunately, you don't have the opportunity to do that in most cases, especially if you're taking a group of people. If your sample size is people who already believe the misinformation, it's going to be hard to give them the pre-bunking information. However, you can take advantage of the fact, like I was saying a little bit earlier, that most people who generally believe something, they don't have a hard belief in it. They just have generally heard it and they accept what they've heard without having looked at it too closely. So pre-bunking kind of works a little bit. Pretty much everything else either has no effect or has the opposite effect. It makes them double down on their false beliefs. So getting good information out there in as many forms as we can, using as many different communication techniques as we can, is super, super important. And so what I think that what I do is super important. I have one particular communication technique. Lots of other people in my business have lots of other communication techniques, and all of what they're doing is super important too. I just think it's critical that we get good information out there so that people can make good decisions based on good information.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think with people that we're close to? Any difference there if we have a relationship with someone in intervening?
Not really. When it's someone like a close friend or family, there's additional risk. I mean,
Yeah.
when you try to correct their beliefs, you are you're putting your relationship at risk because people tend to react negatively when their sacred cow is challenged. So one of the episodes that I did that turned out to be the most influential was very, very early on in the process. And it was called Emergency Handbook: What to Do When a Friend Loves Woo. And people will often ask me, my grandmother believes this strange thing. Do you have an episode that debunks that I can play for her? And I say, yeah, I do, but don't
Mm,
do that.
mm,
Instead, play for her this episode that's on something you both already agree with and get her interested in the process of how we separate good information from bad information. And hopefully she'll come upon re-examining her beliefs on her own if you can get her interested in the process. But don't open by directly challenging her misinformation. That's just going to make things worse. So in most cases, I tell people, just don't do anything. It's not the end of the world that your grandmother thinks her poodle is psychic. Don't challenge her on it. It's just risking the relationship. And if you absolutely must, then go about it in a smarter way than simply opening by challenging it directly.
right. Brian, before I ask my last question, for people who want to know more about where to look for those kind of resources from you, where should people look for you online?
Skeptoid.com. Oh, there it is. It's on my shirt. Shockingly, half of my wardrobe is this is the company logo because we also do documentary films and stuff. This is the podcast logo. It's on my mug. Everything in my life is Skeptoid branded stuff everywhere. So the Skeptoid podcast is my main product weekly since 2006. It's over
Wow.
1,000 episodes.
Wow.
Any story you can imagine has been covered in a show.
Wow. Great. We'll put links in the show notes for people to check that out. And Brian,
Cool.
my last question, we've started to touch on it. What do you hope that people get from your work?
I hope that people come away from Skeptoid with an appreciation for how cool and fun the process is of learning what's real from what's not, because it really is interesting. And I mean, we talked about the whole process of Australia doesn't exist and how you end up learning a lot of really cool real history that gives fascinating context, and you can walk away richer for the experience. Correcting misinformation should not be an inherently negative process. If you just tell someone that ghost you believe, that's not real, there's no such thing as ghosts, that's inherently negative. You've just attacked their cherished belief. But if you can replace that with way more cool information, like whatever manifestation the ghost was taking, here's what was actually causing that, and here's how we know, and here's how we can replicate it and duplicate it, and wow, isn't that neat? Now you're doing something that's positive. You're giving people something rather than taking something away. So that's what I hope people come away with listening to my show, even when they hit upon an episode that challenges something that they believe. I hope that they come away with a positive experience rather than a negative experience.
Well, Brian Dunning, for making your work positive and interesting, and for taking this interview with me, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun to talk about. It's been a great time being here with you.